You've been carrying the weight of the day, haven't you? The worry, the tiredness, it's all right. You can let it go now. Let me take you to a place where the wind can lift your cares away, where the sky is wide and open, and a little girl named Dorothy is just beginning a journey that will lead her and you to rest. On the great Kansas prairies, the world was vast and quiet. The sun had baked the land into a soft gray, and the grass lay still, as if waiting. Dorothy lived in a small house with her Uncle Henry and Aunt Em. The house had just one room, but it was warm and safe. In one corner stood a big bed for Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, and in another corner, a little bed for Dorothy. A rusty cook stove sat near the wall, and a cupboard held the dishes. It was simple, but it was home. Outside, the prairie stretched to the edge of the sky. No trees, no other houses, just the sky so big it seemed to hold everything. Dorothy would stand in the doorway and look out, and sometimes she would feel very small. But she had Toto, her little black dog with his silky fur and bright, twinkling eyes. Toto never grew gray like everything else. He ran and played, and Dorothy laughed with him. That laughter was a precious thing, like a tiny light in a quiet world. Today, though, there was a change in the air. Uncle Henry looked at the sky, and it was even grayer than usual. A low wail came from the north, and then a sharp whistle from the south. The grass began to bow in waves. Uncle Henry stood up quickly. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he said, and he ran to look after the cows and horses. Aunt Em dropped her dishcloth and came to the door. Her face was worried. "Quick, Dorothy, run for the cellar," she cried. Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed. Dorothy scrambled to get him, but the wind grew loud, and the house shook. Aunt Em opened the trap door in the floor and climbed down the ladder into the dark hole below. Dorothy finally caught Toto. She was halfway across the room when a great shriek of wind came and the house lifted. She lost her footing and sat down hard on the floor. And then something strange happened. The house began to whirl, slowly at first, then faster. It rose into the air like a balloon. Dorothy felt herself floating, carried by the wind. The north and south winds met right where the house stood, and it became the center of the cyclone. Inside that spinning wall of air, everything was surprisingly still. The house rose higher and higher until it sat on top of the cyclone, and there it stayed, carried miles and miles away as easily as a feather. It was very dark. The wind howled all around, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. At first, the house tipped and turned, but then it settled into a gentle rocking motion like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about, barking. Once he fell through the open trap door, but the strong air held him up, and Dorothy pulled him back by his ear. She closed the trap door and sat down on the swaying floor. Hour after hour passed. Slowly, Dorothy's fear faded. The rocking was soothing now. She wondered what would happen when the house came down, but as nothing terrible occurred, she stopped worrying. She decided to wait calmly to see what the future would bring. She crawled across the floor to her little bed and lay down. Toto followed, curling up beside her. The wind sang its wild song, but Dorothy felt safe, cradled in the heart of the storm. And soon she closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. She was awakened by a sudden jolt. The house had landed. But it was not a hard landing. It was gentle, like a sigh. Dorothy sat up. The room was bright with sunshine. She ran to the door, Toto at her heels, and opened it. And oh, what a sight! The world had changed. No longer gray, but bursting with color. Lovely green grass covered the ground. Tall trees bore ripe, delicious fruits. Banks of gorgeous flowers bloomed everywhere, red, yellow, purple, blue. Birds with feathers like jewels sang and fluttered. A little brook rushed and sparkled between green banks, murmuring a happy song. Dorothy had never seen anything so beautiful. Her heart felt light, as if the gray of the prairie had been washed away. She stood there, taking it all in. And then she noticed a group of people coming toward her. They were short, like her, but their faces looked older. They wore tall, pointed hats with little bells that tinkled sweetly as they walked. The men's hats were blue, and a woman's hat was white. They seemed friendly, and Dorothy felt no fear. The story is just beginning, but for now, you can rest here in this gentle landing. The wind has carried you to a place of peace. Let the colors and the soft sounds of the brook fill your mind. You are safe. You have let go of the day's weight, and it has been carried away. You are enough. You are loved. Sleep well, dear friend, sleep well. Chapter II. Chapter II. The council with the Munchkins. She was awakened by a shock, so sudden and severe that if Dorothy had not been lying on the soft bed, she might have been hurt. As it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened. And Toto put his cold little nose into her face and whined dismally. Dorothy sat up and noticed that the house was not moving, nor was it dark, for a bright sunshine came in at the window, flooding the little room. She sprang from her bed, and with Toto at her heels ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights she saw. The cyclone had set the house down very gently, for a cyclone in the midst of a country of marvelous beauty. There were lovely patches of greensward all about, with stately trees bearing rich and luscious fruits. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in the trees and bushes. A little way off was a small brook, rushing and sparkling along between green banks and murmuring in a voice very grateful to a little girl who had lived so long on the dry, gray prairies. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming toward her a group of the queerest people she had ever seen. They were not as big as the grown folk she had always Used to, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, who was a well-grown child for her age, although they were, so far as looks go, many years older. Three were men and one a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore round hats that rose to a small point a foot above their heads, with little bells around the brims that tinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue. The little woman's hat was white, and she wore a white gown that hung in pleats from her shoulders. Over it were sprinkled little stars that glistened in the sun like diamonds. The men were dressed in blue, of the same shade as their hats, and wore well-polished boots with a deep roll of blue at the tops. The men, Dorothy thought, were about as old as Uncle Henry, for two of them had beards, but the little woman was doubtless much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles, her hair was nearly white, and she walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house, where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, they paused and whispered among themselves, as if afraid to come farther. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said, in a sweet voice, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the wicked witch of the East and for setting our people free from bondage." And Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorceress and saying she had killed the wicked witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home, and she had never killed anything in all her life. But the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said, with hesitation, "You are very kind, but there must be some mistake. I have not killed anything. Your house did anyway," replied the little old woman with a laugh. "And that is the same thing. See," she continued, pointing to a corner of the house. "There are her 2 feet still sticking out from under a block of wood." And Dorothy looked and gave a little cry of fright. There indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes with pointed toes. "Oh dear, cried Dorothy, clasping her hands together in dismay. "The house must have fallen on her. Whatever shall we do?" "There is nothing to be done," said the little woman calmly. "But who was she?" asked Dorothy. "And she was the wicked witch of the East, as I said," answered the little woman. "She has held all the Munchkins in bondage for many years, making them slave for her night and day. Now they are all set free and are grateful to you for the favor." "Who are the Munchkins?" inquired Dorothy. "They are the people who live in this land of the East, where the wicked a witch ruled." "Are you a Munchkin?" asked Dorothy. "No, but I am their friend. although I live in the land of the north. When they saw the witch of the east was dead, the Munchkins sent a swift messenger to me, and I came at once. I am the witch of the north. Oh, gracious, cried Dorothy. Are you a real witch? Yes, indeed, answered the little woman. But I am a good witch and,